In the freezing sleet, retired Captain Ethan Hayes stopped short before a huddled figure on a park bench. It's not a stray, but Ghost. The canine partner he thought was lost forever. Now just a frail body with familiar scars. This reunion will lead them to a buried secret and a rescue where time is running out. Because what this dog knows could change everything. If you believe no hero deserves to be forgotten, please subscribe to follow their story. The late winter afternoon was dying, bleeding a weak, gray light over Forks, Washington. A miserable, freezing sleet fell from the sky, coating the skeletal branches of the trees and turning the sidewalks into slick, dark mirrors. It was the kind of cold that seeped past clothing and settled deep in the bones, a cold that felt personal. For Captain Ethan Hayes, it was a familiar companion. At 38, he looked a decade older, his tall frame held with a disciplined stiffness that couldn't quite hide a persistent limp in his left leg. Short, dark hair was beginning to gray at the temples, and his blue eyes, once sharp and clear, were now clouded with a permanent weariness. Medically discharged after an IED blast in Afghanistan ended his career and shattered his leg, Ethan spent most days in a quiet battle with the ghosts of his past, his walks through the deserted town park a familiar, aimless ritual. As he passed the empty playground, his gaze fell upon a lone park bench near the frosted-over pond. On it sat a pathetic lump of misery, a shape so still he first thought it was a pile of discarded rags. But then it trembled, a violent, uncontrollable shiver that shook its entire frame. Curiosity, a feeling he hadn't truly felt in years, pulled him off the path. As he drew closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a dog. An old German shepherd, whose once beautiful gray and white coat was now a matted, filthy mess, clinging to a body so thin that every rib stood out in sharp relief. The dog didn't lift its head, didn't even seem to notice his approach. It just shivered, its eyes closed against the biting sleet. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. There was something horribly familiar in the way the gray saddle marking spread across the dog's back, in the slight, almost imperceptible tilt of its right ear. He knelt, his bad knee protesting in the cold, and gently brushed away the icy slush from the dog's face. The animal flinched, but didn't have the energy to pull away. And then Ethan saw it, a faint, pale scar running just above the dog's left eye. A scar he himself had watched a field medic stitch closed years ago. His heart stopped. "Ghost?" he whispered, the name a painful, rusted thing in his throat. At the sound, the dog's eyes flickered open, dull and clouded with age, but for a single, fleeting moment, a spark of recognition ignited in their depths. Without a second thought, Ethan shrugged off his thick, insulated jacket. He carefully wrapped it around the dog's frail body, a wave of pure, white-hot purpose cutting through the fog of his apathy. He scooped his partner into his arms, shocked at how little he weighed. The once powerful, 90-pound canine felt as light as a bundle of sticks. Walking away from the park, Ethan no longer felt the cold. His steps were no longer aimless. He had a mission. He was taking his soldier home. Inside the warmth of Ethan's small, Spartan cabin, the storm outside seemed a world away. He had laid Ghost on a thick wool blanket in front of the stone fireplace, the flames casting a gentle, flickering light on the dog's exhausted form. As Ghost slowly lapped water from a bowl, Ethan took a soft, damp cloth and began to carefully clean the matted fur. It was a slow, tender process, and with each swipe, a story of hardship was revealed. He knew the old scars intimately, the pale line above the left eye, the puckered tissue on his flank where shrapnel had hit. Those were marks of honor, of battles fought and survived together. But as the grime washed away, new wounds came to light. Ugly, raw patches of skin on his neck spoke of a rope or a chain pulled too tight for too long. His pads were cracked and bleeding, and his whole body was a testament to slow starvation. A cold, protective anger began to burn in Ethan's chest, replacing the familiar numbness. These were not the scars of a soldier. They were the marks of a victim. Who could have taken this hero and broken him so cruelly? Why would anyone leave him to die on a park bench? The question circled in his mind, sharp and painful. His thoughts were shattered by the shrill ring of his phone, a sound so unwelcome in his quiet world that he almost ignored it. He answered reluctantly. "Hayes." The voice on the other end was strained, a woman's voice, cracking with a desperate sorrow he recognized all too well. It was Clara, the widow of his best friend, Sergeant Mike Jennings. She spoke in frantic bursts, her words tumbling over one another. Her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, was gone. She had wandered off during a family hike in the Olympic National Forest 2 days ago. The official search was struggling, hampered by the relentless storm, and Clara was calling him as a last resort, remembering the stories Mike used to tell of Ethan and his legendary K9 partner. After the call ended, Ethan stood motionless, the woman's desperate plea echoing in the silent room. He wasn't a soldier anymore, not in any official capacity. But the call was a debt he had to answer. He retrieved a large topographical map of the national park from a drawer and spread it across the wooden floor. He traced the search grid outlined by the park rangers, a systematic but failing effort. Suddenly, Ghost, who had been resting quietly, lifted his head. With a low whine, he struggled to his feet, his legs trembling with the effort. He limped over to the map, his nose twitching, sniffing the paper intently. Then, he nudged a specific spot with his muzzle, far outside the official search area, in a rugged, almost inaccessible cluster of peaks. He looked up at Ethan, his old eyes insistent, and nudged the map again in the exact same place. It wasn't a random gesture. It was a clear, deliberate signal, a flash of the brilliant, focused partner he once knew. There was no debate in Ethan's mind. The flicker of certainty in Ghost's eyes was more compelling than any satellite image or search grid. Trust your partner. It was the first rule of any K9 unit, a creed etched into his soul. He packed a small waterproof go bag with military efficiency, a first aid kit, protein bars, a compass, and extra water. For Ghost, he prepared a mixture of high-energy wet food and carefully wrapped the dog's raw paws in soft bandages. An hour later, they were at the makeshift command post at the edge of the national park. A tall, athletic woman in a green park ranger uniform intercepted him before he could reach the trailhead. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight, practical bun, and her sharp, intelligent eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. This was Anya Sharma, the lead ranger in charge of the search. She held a clipboard like a shield, and her demeanor was one of pure, no-nonsense authority. "Sir, I can't let you go in there," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "The weather is turning, and my teams are already stretched thin. A civilian with a sick dog is a liability we can't afford." Ethan met her gaze, his own expression calm but unyielding. "I was Captain Ethan Hayes, 75th Ranger Regiment. This is my former MWD, Ghost. He has a lead." Anya's expression tightened. "With all due respect, Captain, this is not a battlefield, and that dog needs a vet, not a hike. The area is closed to the public. It's too dangerous." Ethan simply sidestepped her. "My friend's daughter is out there. I'm not asking for permission." He gave a soft command, and Ghost, despite his weakness, limped faithfully past the official barricade and into the dense, dripping forest. The air under the canopy of ancient cedars was heavy and damp. They moved through a world of green moss, giant ferns, and the constant sound of dripping water. The terrain was brutal, a tangle of fallen logs and steep, muddy inclines. Ethan often had to lift his frail partner over obstacles, but Ghost never faltered. His nose was to the ground, his body language, a symphony of focus as he followed a trail that was utterly invisible to human eyes. It was not a path of dirt and stone, but one of scent. After 2 hours, Ghost stopped near the base of a massive fern. He began sniffing insistently at the dark, damp soil, whining softly. Ethan knelt, his knee sinking into the moss, and carefully pushed aside the wet leaves. And there it was, a small plastic butterfly hair clip. Its bright pink color was a shocking, heartbreaking splash against the forest floor. He knew from Clara that Lily never went anywhere without it. He took a quick photo with his phone, capturing the GPS coordinates, and sent it to the only official number he had, Anya's. Then, he looked at Ghost, whose tail gave a single, weak wag. His faith was absolute. They pushed onward. They had been moving for hours when the forest darkened. The sky, which had been a bruised gray, turned a deep, angry purple. A low rumble of thunder echoed through the valleys, and the wind began to howl, tearing through the canopy and driving the sleet sideways in stinging sheets. The temperature plummeted. Ethan zipped his thin jacket higher, his focus now a desperate race against the clock. Ghost was faltering, his breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps, but he refused to stop. With a final, heroic surge of energy, the old dog pushed up a steep, rocky incline, his paws scrambling for purchase. He led Ethan to a small clearing on a high ridge, where a structure stood silhouetted against the violent sky. An old fire lookout tower, its wooden frame skeletal and battered by years of neglect. At the base of the rickety stairs, Ghost finally collapsed onto the wet ground, his mission complete. He had brought them to the place. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He climbed the stairs cautiously, his hand resting on the holstered pistol he hadn't touched in years. The door creaked open under his palm. The air inside was still and smelled of damp wood and rain. In the far corner, a small child was huddled under a threadbare army blanket, her face pale and her dark hair plastered to her forehead. It was Lily, her eyes wide with fear, and she was not alone. Sitting on an overturned crate a few feet away was a man. He was gaunt and thin, with a tangled, matted beard and hollow, haunted eyes that seemed to look straight through Ethan. He was cradling an old, unlit kerosene lantern, as if it were a precious thing. He wore faded fatigues, and despite his wild appearance, his posture was not threatening, it was protective. "She's safe here," the man said, his voice a dry rasp. "The world out there, all the noise, it's not for her. I'm keeping her safe." Ethan slowly lowered his hand from his weapon. He recognized the look in the man's eyes, the vacant stare of someone who had seen too much. He was looking at a mirror of his own brokenness. This was not a monster. This was a soldier. "I understand," Ethan said, his voice quiet and even. "My name is Ethan Hayes. I was a captain with the 75th. The man, whose name Ethan would learn was Elias, blinked slowly. The mention of a unit seemed to anchor him slightly. "I know you want to protect her," Ethan continued, taking a careful step inside. "We were all trained to protect the innocent. But her mother is out there, terrified. Her love is the only shelter this little girl really needs. We have to get her home. It's our duty, soldier." He wasn't talking to a kidnapper. He was talking to a comrade, one lost soul speaking to another in the heart of the storm. For a long moment, the only sounds in the old lookout tower were the howling wind and the frantic beating of 3 human hearts. Elias looked from the small, trembling girl to the quiet resolve in Ethan's eyes, and something in his haunted gaze finally broke. He gave a slow, deep nod. The journey down the mountain was treacherous, but the storm was beginning to break, its fury lessening with each step they took toward civilization. They met Ranger Sharma and her team at the tree line, her expression of stern authority replaced with one of profound relief. The reunion between Lily and her mother Clara was a storm of its own, a desperate, tearful embrace that seemed to heal the very air around them. Nearby, Ghost lay on a stretcher, weak but awake, his tired eyes watching the scene. In the days that followed, Ethan did not forget the other soldier he had left on the mountain. He spoke at length with the authorities, not as a witness against Elias, but as an advocate for him. He explained the invisible wounds that so many carried home, the way the battlefield can follow you into the quietest of places. His words carried the weight of truth, and Elias was given the help he desperately needed. not the punishment the law might have otherwise demanded. In fighting for Elias, Ethan found he was also fighting for himself, finally finding a purpose in the wreckage of his past. Months later, as spring breathed new life into the forests of Washington, a new sign stood at the entrance to a sprawling, peaceful property nestled among the tall cedars. It read, "The Ghost Project, a sanctuary for warriors and their guardians." Using his savings and an outpouring of support from the community, Ethan had created the very thing he realized the world needed. It was not a sterile facility, but a collection of rustic cabins connected by quiet walking trails, a place where veterans and their service animals could come to heal together, to find peace in the silence of the woods instead of ghosts. Ethan stood by that sign now, the weariness in his eyes replaced by a calm, steady light. Beside him sat Ghost, no longer a frail shadow, but a strong, healthy animal. His gray and white coat thick and clean, his tail wagging gently as he surveyed his new domain. A truck pulled up the gravel driveway, and a young man in an old army jacket stepped out. He looked lost, carrying the same heavy, invisible burdens Ethan knew so well. Ethan walked forward, a genuine smile on his face. "Welcome," he said, extending a hand. "We've been waiting for you." As the two men shook hands, Ghost trotted forward and gently nudged the newcomer's leg, a silent, furry greeting that spoke volumes. The cycle of healing had begun anew. The story of Ethan and Ghost reminds us that our deepest wounds are often the ones no one can see, and that true healing often begins with an act of loyalty. A forgotten hero on a park bench became the beacon that guided another lost soldier home, proving that a mission of love is the most important one of all. If their journey of second chances touched your heart, perhaps you could share it with someone who needs a little hope today. We would be honored to read your own stories of the incredible animals who have guided you in the comments below. By subscribing to our channel, you help us continue to give a voice to these silent heroes and their unwavering love.